Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host, Kushalmehra. So, the election season is on, and what should be discussed does not get discussed, and what should not be discussed always gets discussed. But on the Cārvāka podcast, we only discuss things that matter. So, if you are in an election year, what you should be discussing is infrastructure, unemployment, poverty, policy, and what gets discussed is Arvind Kejriwal, a person who is fighting 22 seats in total in the parliamentary election, is right now getting so much coverage in the Indian mainstream media that if you really cared for this country, you would be puking that this is what happens in this country. And unfortunately, the entire content landscape on YouTube also is obsessed with Arvind Kejriwal. I am not. I don't think he's that important. I don't think his policies are that important because he's literally fighting 22 seats. Uh, so what matters is the discussion around unemployment in India. There is a lot of discussion around it in terms of what are the real figures. The CMIE says one thing, the government of India says one thing. So I reached out to Karan. We recently had a podcast on their paper, Karan's paper, along with Dr. Bhalla, on the removal of extreme poverty in India. So I think this is kind of in relation to that. Karan had also written a Substack in 2023 on the subject itself. So I reached out to him and he said yes. So Karan, kya haal hai? Welcome again.
But yes, sir, thank you so much for having me and many congratulations on the final release of the book. Hoping
Yeah.
to get my copy soon. Probably will get delivered tomorrow or day after. And now that you are here, we'll see you and get it signed from you.
हाँ मिलेंगे अपने तो प्लान बनाएंगे कुछ ना कुछ तो बट Karan, on this important discussion, now I had sent you all the criticisms of the government. I had sent you multiple links that were criticizing the government data also, but I don't know agar तूने ये वाला पढ़ा है. I want to start this with just the press release today. So
Right.
this was the periodic labor force survey, PLFS quarterly bulletin, January to March 2024. Karan, I'm going to put it up on the screen. I
Right.
literally came across this. मैं तुझे भेज नहीं पाया क्योंकि ये literally आज आया है.
आज आया शाम को आया राइट
शाम को आया, so I could not. I apologize. I could not share it with you, but so I just want to share this on the screen first. Now the government has released this. Unemployment rate in urban areas decreased to 6.7% during January to March 2024 for persons of ages 15 years and above. Female UR decreased to 8.5% in January March 2024. Labor force participation rate in urban areas shows an increasing trend from 48.5% to 50.2% during Jan to March 2023 to Jan to March 2024, respectively, for persons of ages 15 years and above. Female labor force participation rate in urban areas rises to 25.6% during Jan to March 2024, reflecting overall increasing trend in LFPR. Increasing trend in worker population ratio for persons of age 15 years and above from 45.2% in January to March 2023 to 46.9% in January to March 2024. And female worker population ratio in urban areas to 23.4% during Jan March 24, reflecting overall increasing um, trend in WPR. Obviously, uh, it's a detailed explanation. What was the sample size? The sample size at an all India level in the urban areas was a total of 5,706 FSUs. Urban sampling unit carved out of the urban frame survey have been surveyed during the quarter Jan March 2024. The number of urban household surveys were 44,598 and number of persons surveyed was 1,69,459 in urban areas. And they've obviously explained the conceptual framework and everything. Unfortunately, I could not go through this because literally it has come a few minutes ago, so even
right
I am kind of going through it as they are. But my first question to you is not this. My first question to you is, how is unemployment data calculated in India? Why I'm saying this is that many people, whether it's Mallikarjun Kharge ji, he has, and I shared articles with you about Mallikarjun Kharge ji or Priyanka Vadra or Priyanka Gandhi, however she may want to be addressed as, and they have accused the government of number juggling. They say the government is juggling numbers. So, what is unemployment at a definitional level? Like, how do we define unemployment?
So basically, there are two issues here. You're asking about the definition and how it's calculated. So let me begin with the definition. Unemployment rate is nothing but, you take the people who are willing to work and can't find jobs and divided by the people who are willing to work, and that gives you your unemployment rate. So it's defined as the number of unemployed people divided by the total, kind of population which is in the workforce. Now that when we're talking about population within the workforce, we are talking about those who are looking for work, right? And that comprises of two sets of individuals: those who are employed and those who are unemployed. So if you are not working and if you're not looking for work, you're not unemployed, and therefore you're not counted as unemployed. You are unemployed only if you're looking for work and can't find work. Because काफी लोग होते हैं, like particularly you would see this a lot, that there are certain age cohorts in which women don't want to work, whether that's because they're having children, they want to take care of children, whether they want to spend more time on family care, or whatever be the reason, they just don't want to work. So it doesn't make sense to include that in the definition of unemployment, and this definition is not unique to India. This definition is applied everywhere else in the world. So it's like something, like how 1 kilometer has 1,000 meters, kind of a yardstick, where the definition does not change whether you move from one country to another. uh, India's measurement of unemployment now is slightly tricky, because what used to happen earlier was we had the employment unemployment surveys that were done, and we have that going way back to 1950s and sorry, 1980s. We have all the data digitized. uh, when the new government came in 2014, shortly afterwards, they wanted to kind of increase the frequency with which this survey was done, because earlier it used to be done once in a couple of years. So the periodic labor force survey was created. And the periodic labor force survey does this entire exercise on an annual basis. So you have the annual kind of survey that captures unemployment, employment, etc., for both rural and urban areas. And then for urban areas, you also have a quarterly kind of sample that you draw. So what they've released today is the quarterly results for the urban areas, and that's why you don't find much discussion of the rural areas. So if you look at unemployment rate today, it's slightly higher than what the national unemployment rate would be for the same period, largely because turns out rural unemployment is kind of lower, and that pulls down the average to about 3% level. Now, there are two ways in which we also ask this question, that whether you're looking for work and whether you are employed or not. One is the usual status. So usual status में क्या है कि we'll go and ask कि last 365 days में were you looking for a job and were you employed for X number of days, and if yes, then yes, you are employed. If not, then you are unemployed. And if you weren't looking for a job, then you are not a part of the workforce. There's another one which is called the current weekly status, which goes and asks this specific question for the last 1 week ka reference period. And that's why you get like weekly status and usual status ke do alag alag definition ke results. As it turns out, the US uses the weekly status. That's what the BLS does, because of course, जितना ज़्यादा लंबा reference period होता है, उतना ज़्यादा problems होता है in terms of kind of getting good set of responses and measurement error and those sort of stuff. So these are the broad ways in which we kind of calculate unemployment in India.
Okay, as far as this survey is concerned, the definition written over here is unemployment rate is defined as the percentage of persons unemployed among the persons in the labor force.
Yeah,
So, once again, so who is part of the labor force then? That again, so let me explain this with a
done.
very classical analogy of my experience as a former textile entrepreneur who employed a lot of people for good 20 years. I mean, I must have generated so many thousand jobs over my entrepreneurial career. Now, my workers would never work with me for more than a period of 2 to 3 months. And anybody who has owned a migrant labor run unit will give you this answer. So, how does this happen? They'll come, And they always come as families, right? तो क्या होगा कि चार कजिन आ जाएंगे या सगे भाई आ जाएंगे या ऐसे आएंगे, and they would always rent out premises near the worker area of the factory wherever they are working,
Hmm.
and they share the apartment. So समझ ले कोई रात में काम कर रहा है, कोई थर्ड में काम कर रहा है, कोई सेकंड में काम कर रहा है, कोई फर्स्ट शिफ्ट में काम कर रहा है, और वो लोग क्या करते हैं, जो फर्स्ट वाला काम कर रहा है तो सेकंड और थर्ड वाले उस घर में सो रहे होते हैं, जब
Hmm.
सेकंड वाला काम कर रहा है तो थर्ड और फर्स्ट वाला सो रहा होता है. दैट इज हाउ दे काइंड ऑफ go back and forth using the same premises. But they always keep leaving and coming back, leaving and coming back, because and I used to find they used to go back home in 3 cycles. One was when they are actually putting the seeds for their crop,
Hmm.
and because they had multiple crops, right? So they would have to go 3 to 4 times. Dhan काटने जाना पड़ता था, बीज बोने जाना पड़ता था. Now technically these people were not in a position uh, to be continuously employed, because they would go back to their village and they would be very clear, right? वो जब आते थे ना, they would tell me कि साहब अभी गांव जाने का समय आ गया है, and they
Hmm.
would either find a replacement worker or go. So but are those people employed then when they go back to their village?
Yeah,
That's
yeah, absolutely. Because uh, so there are two. Now we're going to more, granular stuff, right? There's something known as principal activity, and then there's something known as secondary activity. So the principal activity in this case is wage employment, which is what they're doing at your factory. And their secondary activity becomes when they go back to their field and do agricultural work. Mind you, if you're working on the field for your own field, and whatever work you do or whatever you produce is actually sold in the market, that still counts as employment. So because it's done for market production, so it doesn't matter whether they go back or whether they stay here. For all intents and purposes, they're counted as being employed workers as per the definition is concerned.
hmm. But then when they are in the village, right? They are not part of the labor force as per the Government of India definition.
No, they're still part of the labor force because they're still working, just not part of the urban labor force. Now they've gone back to a rural area and they're still working, even if they're working on their own farm, because this is done for production which is going to be sold in the market, they're counted as employed workers.
Okay, then how does the urban rate not fluctuate then?
You
Because
mean
so
the
many
urban?
people come and go, come and go, come and go.
Yeah, but see, if there are many people entering and exiting, so you get a seasonality in the urban workforce rate, in the workforce participation rate, and then you would basically see कि particular season में there's a sharp decline, there's a sharp
या
increase.
मैं तेरे को बोलता हूँ, अप्रैल मई में शादी का सीजन के टाइम के
हाँ,
अंदर, और दिसंबर जैन फेब में जब नॉर्दर्न इंडिया में शादी का सीजन होता है ना, तभी हमारे वर्कर्स, आई रिमेंबर, यूज्ड टू ड्रॉप डाउन बाय लाइक 30-40%. सीधा
हाँ.
गिर ही जाते थे वर्कर. एंड नो मैटर व्हाट यू डू, no matter what you do,
They're
they're
not.
not coming.
Yeah. Yeah, but that basically that's a seasonality issue that does not increase unemployment, and that's one of the reason why in India because we don't do seasonal adjustments. I don't know why Mosby is very scared of doing it. So हम क्या करते हैं, rather than looking at quarter by quarter numbers, we look at year over year. So April वाला जो period है, we'll compare it with the April period last year, because last year भी ये same problem हुआ होगा that they would have gone back. And that's why we do year over year kind of calculations rather than doing quarter over quarter calculations for some of these variables.
Hmm. Okay, now I'm going to look into specific criticisms of the government. This is
Hmm.
an article that was shared in the scroll. I'm going to first go to the scroll. This article was written on 21st March 2024 by Abhik Deb. It is titled "A Decade Under Modi: Rising Unemployment, Declining Wages, Poor Quality Jobs." A quick look at the Modi government fared on creating jobs and addressing economic distress. Now, I'm going to read excerpts from this. Okay. India's unemployment rate climbed to 6.1% in 2017-18, the highest in 45 years.
Can
Periodic
I just
labor force.
interject? Can I
हाँ
just
बोल.
interject here? ये जो पूरा 45 year वाला है ना, this has been made a big issue, uh, largely because people kind of compare it with 2011. बट एक लेबर ब्यूरो का सर्वे हुआ था 2014 में, which shows that unemployment rate was consistently increasing between 2011 and 2014. So that's point number one. So this 45-year reference itself is very questionable and not consistent with what we know. The second issue, and this is kind of more pressing if you ask me, is ki when the 2017 survey was leaked or kind of shared, there were all sorts of questions that were raised about the quality of this data or its comparability with the previous surveys, and it was done by people presumably in India who kind of wanted to believe something entirely opposite. I was also, it was hard for me to imagine कि 45-year high unemployment rate अब हुआ होगा rather than in 80s and 70s when we were a much more controlled economy. Nevertheless, recently ILO itself has said that the 2017-18 survey was very bad quality and therefore they're not using this survey at all. So International Labour Organization, independent organization, is not using this survey because it's that bad of a quality. And what else was of bad quality in 2017-18? Also the consumption expenditure survey that was not released. So you can use these surveys if you want, but there is a bigger issue here. The bigger issue is a how is it that so many surveys in 2017-18 were of so bad quality to begin with? What went wrong? And second, given that now all credible institutions are refraining from using these data, why is it that certain people and certain media houses still continue to use this survey or cite this number?
I mean, they would come back and say that I don't know how to say this, but you're wrong. This number is absolutely authentic. What would your comeback to that be?
Well, I mean, try convincing ILO that because ILO does not use it. They use all government surveys except these two surveys, 17-18 and 18-19, because it's actually very bad data quality. So there broadly there are two issues. एक तो इन्होंने sampling frame change करा था, ठीक है. दूसरा, they also kind of did a lot of stuff which didn't probably go as per their plan because the PLFS survey was the first time they had a panel component. So panel में क्या होता है कि एक ही घर पे you do second visit, third visit to kind of see how things are changing over a period of time. So something went wrong with the first two versions of the PLFS survey, and something is still wrong even with the current version of PLFS survey, and we'll discuss it during the course of this discussion. But this 45-year high unemployment rate figure in itself is questionable at best to begin with. So I just
But
wanted to kind of put my strong objection to this particular phrase being used in a lot of these articles that we're going to discuss today.
okay, fair enough. But यार article तो पढ़ूं.
Uh,
Article पढ़ना जरूरी है. So they their whole point is that monthly surveys conducted by private think tanks Center for Monitoring Indian Economy have consistently found unemployment rates to be much higher than the government numbers. Economists and policy researchers rely on CMIE data because of the lack of adequate and timely government data. Yeah, they are saying the complete opposite of what you're saying. So what they're saying is that uh, आप जो डेटा रिलाई करते हो वो इनएक्यूरेट है या सीएमआई का डेटा एक्यूरेट है. अरे असली डेटा कौन सा है यार, मतलब मैं
मैं
कैसे समझू, मेरे को तो इकोनॉमिक्स नहीं आती ना.
नहीं तो this is a very important question, and CMI says only 9% of Indian women are in the workforce. Only 9%. PLFS shows it to be much higher. Abhi urban wala is showing 25%. Now, when you look around, do you see more women in the workforce today than you did before? You do, right? That itself
I,
gives you a sign that something's off with the CMI. I'll give you another example. According to CMI, India's female labor force participation rate is lower than countries like Yemen.
wait, what?
So, अब मेरे को बताओ, how do I take it? How do I take it seriously? And look, again, CMI's data also has problems. World Bank paper that came out just as our paper came out acknowledged those problems because they were using CMI data and they said ki boss iske weights are off. So we cannot use this data as it is. We need to do a lot of statistical analysis to fix this data, and then we will do more statistical analysis on the fixed data. तो पहले हम क्या करेंगे, पहले हम डेटा को थोड़ा चेंज वेंज करेंगे, एडजस्ट करेंगे वेट्स, मेक इट कंपेरेबल, एंड देन वो जो कंपेरेबल डेटा मिलेगा उसके बेसिस पे हम हमारा कैलकुलेशन करेंगे. So, long and short story is yes, you can look at CMI because CMI gives you a monthly number. But then, what explains the large difference between NSS and CMI numbers? Coincidentally, CMI's numbers are very similar to the NSS numbers जो मॉस्पी करता है, Indian government करती है for the year 2017, which the ILO says it's just not a good survey quality survey for us to use for our calculations.
Can you explain why?
Why does the ILO feel that way?
Yeah.
Inconsistencies, right? When you look at a survey, you basically have some, you go ask people, you kind of get a nationally representative sample, and there you get, certain kind of important indicators of interest such as unemployment rate, wage growth, all of that stuff. And then when you look at those numbers, they have to make sense to you, and they have to make sense with all other information that you have about the economy. So जैसे मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ कैसा था, what was the share of labor in national income, and so on and so forth. So when internal consistency of the survey is not making sense, and you cannot externally validate this with other data that you know about the economy, then you know that something is wrong. Now, what many of these guys would come and say is that your national accounts is wrong, but the survey is correct. But then this becomes like a tutu mema kind of an argument because some people will say that the survey is wrong, national accounts is right. The best way to bypass this entire discussion is to actually go even granular and look at what makes up the national accounts, because there's a lot of administrative data that you get. So जैसे एक एग्जांपल देता हूँ एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव डेटा का, ईपीएफओ contributions, not the accounts, but the
Okay.
pension contributions.
Mm-hmm.
कि
समझ
कितने
गया.
लोगों, कितना वर्कर ने कितना कंट्रीब्यूट करा या एम्प्लॉयर ने कितना कंट्रीब्यूट करा, राइट? This would give you a sense of what happened to the wage.
Mm-hmm.
So there are ways of kind of cross validating surveys and seeing whether they're consistent or not. India mein that kind of research is at a very nascent stage. So people take these surveys, take them at face value, write newspaper articles, and that's it. They don't focus on like सर्वे क्वालिटी कैसा था, मेजरमेंट एरर है नहीं है, आइटम रिस्पॉन्स रेट क्या था, because a lot of times households don't respond to certain questions. So for instance, if you go and ask about income, chances are many of them will not tell you. Chances are if you go and ask them, do you have a car, they'll probably not want to answer that, even if they have or not. So when you have these kinds of problems, you kind of have to be a bit more cautious while dealing with these survey data, and kind of taking things forward from there. And unfortunately, as I said, it's at a very nascent stage. This kind of research is at a very nascent stage in India.
So, okay, now the next bit was, they say in the manufacturing sector, jobs have halved in 2016 and 21. Analysts have shown that employment in the sector had been falling even before COVID 19. Then they talk about a study published in 2018 that also found that majority of manufacturing jobs in India are low paying and increasingly less productive.
Well, no surprises there that they are low paying because largely um India's competitive advantage is in labor intensive manufacturing, and that comparative advantage comes from the fact that the wage is, at least competitive enough. But even at the present wage, is India competitive in a field like textiles, which of course you know much more about
Not.
relative to Bangladesh?
We are expensive. They are way
So
more cheaper than us. Their labor is so sasta.
and it's probably because they're more productive, right? हमारे यहाँ पे productivity is low. Now, why is that productivity low? Many reasons actually. Lack of human capital हो सकता है काफी. It is a big driver, but more importantly, you have made it so ridiculously difficult to have productive manufacturing in this country. You don't allow land to be transferred easily. You don't allow labor to move easily from agriculture to manufacturing sector. So when you create these kind of guardrails and then say that, look, we are doing this to protect the poor and the vulnerable, actually you're killing productivity growth by doing these things. So you're hurting them more by doing them, and then you will come and say that, look, these jobs are being created in are low paying, are low productive. They're low productive and low paying precisely because of the way you have.
वो तो बोल रहे हैं कि इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर भी लो प्रोडक्टिव जॉब है. तो सी माय क्वेरी हियर इज दिस क्रिटिसिज्म इज वेरी कंफ्यूजिंग टू मी, करण, एंड एक्सप्लेन इट टू मी. दे से infrastructure में jobs have increased. Even the scroll article says that it has risen to 13% in 22-23 from 10.6% in 11-12, according to the latest periodic labor force survey. So more than 7 crore Indians currently work in the construction sector, and that number is expected to cross 10 crores. But what's the point? These are low productive jobs. तो मतलब क्या हम रोड नहीं बनाए? मतलब मेरे को समझ में नहीं आ रहा पॉइंट क्या है क्या. My question to all these people who have these discussions is like, what am I as a citizen of India supposed to do about it?
So basically, it's when they say low productive, they mean that the construction work is low productive, but development of that infrastructure will lead to productivity gains. So ek to they omit the latter part. The second thing is, even if it is low productive, you're right. Do we not build roads because we have so much surplus infrastructure ना कि नहीं भी बनाएंगे तो फर्क
या
नहीं
ध्रुव
पड़ेगा.
राठी तो बोलेगा ना कि व्हाई
तो
डू वी नीड हाईवेज, क्योंकि वो
तो
तो ऑटोबान में घूमता है.
तो but fact is that you do need infrastructure, and more importantly, अगर आप इन low productive jobs भी नहीं दोगे, then most of them will go back and depend on agriculture, which would be much worse outcome. They're better off working here because at least the productivity in construction sector is greater than what it was in the agricultural sector. So what we are interested in is the delta, right? Has productivity levels increased over a period of time when this transition happened from being farm workers to construction workers? Yes, it has increased. Can it
Hmm.
increase more? Eventually, yes, it will increase more as you have more and more manufacturing, more and more, kind of you upskill them and kind of make them more equipped to deal with modern machinery for construction. But do you need modern machinery for construction right now when you have so much of surplus labor? In some instances, yes. In most instances, probably not. जब tunneling के लिए चाहिए तो new machinery चाहिए, right? But for construction of roads and some of the standard stuff like construction of hospitals, you don't need to start constructing them in a way that it would be constructed, say, in Western economies where you just have like those uh, beam ka structure and suddenly उसमें पूरा panel वैनल लगा के you immediately build a establishment in a couple of months. That will not be ideal for a development developing economy such as India.
Like, I find this mindset of low quality jobs so problematic is because at the end of the day, whether it's working in textile factories like the one I used to run, or whether it's working in infrastructure, laying the roads or just doing other things, at the end of the day, a job is a job. And every economy and every citizen and every part of society is at different stages in life. When I hear discussions like this, I find it fundamentally grotesque. Okay, I understand the need for producing higher quality jobs because that leads a society to become richer, because you have better per capita gains. But in the meantime, क्या करे आदमी? मतलब, you're right to say, like, no, the agriculture. अच्छा, एक तरफ आप बोलते हो कि too much of the population is involved in agriculture and that also is a problem. Okay, now we're pulling people out of agriculture and we're putting them in different areas. So now that is also a problem. It's
Basically, the issue is that you have to crib.
No, that's the fundamental conclusion that people like me. Listen, I am very clear. I'm not very good in economics. Like, I understand basic broad principles, but I don't understand the granular details. But all I hear when I hear people arguing like this is that, boss, this is like eternally whining because you don't like Modi. So you just find reasons to dislike Modi and you just make shit up, which is what. Now I want to go to the agriculture thing. Okay? So there they say the share of India's workforce in agriculture has also risen during the period which economists say is a bad sign. ये देख, ये यही हो रहा है. Between 2004-5 to 2011-12, when Congress was in power, the share of the workforce in agriculture declined sharply from 58.5 to 48.9. The rate of decline slowed down in the next few years as the share stood at 42.5 in 18-19. But since then, it has risen to 45.5 in 21-22. Now, that's not a good sign. Reverse migration हो रही है from cities to rural areas during the COVID pandemic. That that clearly happened.
Exactly the point. It was the pandemic, right? So suddenly you're taking a one extreme shock and drawing a conclusion for the entire period कि भी पिछले 10 साल में ट्रांजिशन नहीं हुआ बल्कि बढ़ गया है. ऐसा नहीं है. It was reducing, but then a COVID kind of shock happened and you imposed lockdowns in cities, and migrant workers basically were forced to go back to their farms because they didn't have employment and they didn't know how to pay rent and whatnot. And now they're a bit reluctant to come back. See, जब रिवर्स माइग्रेशन एक बार हुआ उसके इमीडिएटली बाद यू कैन नॉट एक्सपेक्ट कि अब हमने लॉकडाउन हटा दिया अब सारे माइग्रेंट वर्कर्स एकदम से वापस आ जाएंगे.
Naturally.
During that period they were doing something over there in rural areas.
Yeah.
So for some of them it might be better to stay, some of them will come back, but that process of adjustment will be very gradual. So there's this concept called instantaneous adjustment and sticky adjustment in macroeconomics. Instantaneous adjustment ये है कि हमने आज ये करा और एकदम से सारी चीजें adjust हो जाएंगी, right? Like interest rate हमने कम करा and then suddenly all interest rates will move and everything will be hunky dory. And then there are like more sticky variables. Interest rates are also sticky variables, but that's just a general example that I'm giving. कि आपने आज कुछ करा and then there will be a gradual adjustment process of how the economy will respond uh, to that. So that's what's actually happening. And even within farming, what none of these guys are saying, which is unfortunate, is that agriculture may be transition हुआ है. So a lot of workforce which used to exist or depend on subsistence agriculture or on cereal farming has now actually kind of gone to cash crop farming, which is of course a much higher paying endeavor.
Yeah.
So that's the other transition that has also happened. So it's you can look at this from the point of view of either looking at agriculture to other sectors ka transition, or you can take another look at it from the point of view of okay, this is the 42% workforce in agriculture. Are they still doing the same stuff that they were doing before, or is there a transition that is kind of also underway over here? uh, we of course don't see that transition in North India because people love to grow rice and wheat, but largely that transition is underway in a lot of states where they're moving to vegetables and exotic fruits and stuff like that. Uh, Now, is that an improvement from before? Yes, it is an improvement from before. Can more be done? Yes, you still need more to be done. So this is where I would kind of summarize what we have discussed so far. A, is there a progress? Yes. Is there a need for more to be done? Absolutely yes. But the problem is that some people don't even want to acknowledge that there has been some progress. So that's the issue.
I want to read a very particular specific line from the Wire article I shared. Just, I mean, so that people don't accuse me of reading it out of context, I'm going to read 2-3 paragraphs above that. So, the recent fall in unemployment rate from 17-18 to 22-23 is itself misleading. It has been accompanied by an increase in female workforce participation rate from 24.5 in 19 to 37.0 in 23. This is written, by the way, by Santosh Mehrotra on 8th May 2024. It is called Some Proof Required, Modi Government's Abysmal Record of No Jobs. हाँ मैं
कैन आई
उसमें
जस्ट
से पढ़
आस्क यू फॉर अ फेवर? एक बार
हाँ
इसकी
जी
ट्विटर प्रोफाइल खोलो।
हाँ हाँ खोलिए
एक
हाँ,
बार अभी
देखा
खोलो। नहीं नहीं, एक बार अभी खोलो प्लीज। Because
ओके
he was on a recent discussion between me and Rahul Shiv Shankar, and he kept calling Rahul Shiv Shankar Darbari and whatnot, very obnoxious. So I just want you to open his Twitter profile if possible, because I want people to see who's a Darbari once and for all.
इसका हैंडल क्या है मेरे को तो आइडिया नहीं है
S
भाई
S Mehrotra one.
एस मेहरोत्रा वन ओके तू 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 पूरी तैयारी करके आया ओके संतोष मेहरोत्रा हाँ जी ये विजिटिंग प्रोफेसर सेंटर फॉर डेवलपमेंट यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ
हाँ,
बाथ यूके रिसर्च फेलो आईजीए इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ
वो छोड़ो,
लैबोरेटरी
बस इसकी इसकी फील्ड में ये देखो कि जयराम रमेश को कितनी बार टैग करता है कि मेरा रीट्वीट कर दो।
ओके मगर मुझे उसका आर्टिकल पढ़ना है दिस
नहीं नहीं,
इज
पढ़ो पढ़ो, बट लाइक ये भी दिखाना जरूरी है कि like look at the extent of politicization of academics in around the world actually.
ये बंदा ना ये
हाँ,
कांग्रेस से है ना ये पूरे कांग्रेस के देखना इसके पूरे सागरिका घोष सागरिका घोष को कर रहा है ठीक है ये देख लो लोगों दिस इज द गाय मैं जिसका आर्टिकल पढ़ रहा हूँ एटलीस्ट पीपल कांट अक्यूज मी ऑफ नॉट रीडिंग पीपल मैं तो
yeah,
पढ़ता हूँ ईमानदारी से
हाँ,
मैं
people
ईमानदारी से
should
पढ़ता हूँ
people should read him, but all people should read him because at some times, once in a blue moon, he has a good idea. Like 200 out of one times, he might have a good idea. But
हम्म
also know that a lot of people have their own ideological biases. I may have my own ideological biases, but at least I try to kind of show data as it is, and that's it, without any
हम्म
commentary. Because I think that is the best thing that you can do in today's world.
हम्म No, Magar, this article was so was so special for that one line that I had read in this article. तो अभी मैं आगे पढ़ूंगा, ठीक है? So, however, this increase, including that of males, is overwhelmingly in the agricultural sector and of the own account and unpaid family work kind. What is not noted is that older women who had been exiting agriculture as mechanization set in already by 11-12 have now been forced to return to agriculture for lack of alternatives, and the younger, now much better educated before, are not finding work. So, women's youth employment rates are high. That's why I shared the number today of
Mhm.
Urban India that was just released today. For the older and younger women, unpaid family work in agriculture, which had been falling sharply, increased from 28.3 million in 17-18 to 58.2 million, rise of 30 million in 22-23. Just as own account work in agriculture shot up from 9.2 million to 29.2 million, rise of 20 million over the same period. Now is the killer line of the article. This rise of 50 million in employment is distress driven, not a matter of celebration.
So
मतलब कहना क्या
employment
चाहता है ये आदमी
employment बढ़े तो प्रॉब्लम, ना बढ़े तो
बड़े
प्रॉब्लम.
तो प्रॉब्लम कुछ भी कर लो प्रॉब्लम
And this guy is so. I generally now don't even want to be on a discussion with him, but he compares global financial crisis with COVID. That is the level of understanding. And then he and I'll send you that Rahul Shiv Shankar wala video. You should watch it just to see how uh, he's it's ridiculous. It's beyond ridiculous. But see, yes, people have gone back to agriculture. People have gone back to self-employment. Question is, why has that happened, and why is it taking so long for the trend to reverse? First question, why it has happened, is of course because of the pandemic. And second question is that honestly, there's a lot more to be said about the fact that now you can sit in a rural area in India and run a enterprise and like sell, like run a relatively small business and be able to sell your products across different parts of the country. There are different kinds of professions that are coming up that don't necessarily require you to be in urban areas. And even within agriculture, there are a lot more cash crops that you can grow today than they were in 2011. Uh, all of this has implications, particularly for women's work, because what comes across in my work with Dr. Bhalla and Dr. Tirtho is that the fall in India's female labor force participation rate happened because a lot of men actually went to cities to work. तो जो उनके household enterprises थे, they basically went out of work in rural areas. And therefore, women kind of shifted their entire focus from working on family enterprises rather than working on family enterprises to taking care of the household and stuff like that. Now, with men actually going back during the pandemic, there was this new dynamism of these household level enterprises in rural areas because जो migrant worker बाहर गया वापस गया है उसको कुछ तो करना है ना कमाने के लिए. So that kind of drove a lot of these women back into the workforce because they started working for the household family unit kind of enterprise that was set up there. Now, by definition, this need not be wage employment, it's unpaid work. Uh, but that's the case in any other country that you actually go. Like, so if for instance, I run a startup from my garage, right? And if I have a family member who helps me, I'm not going to pay them because, again, it's a startup. Somehow that's acceptable to the world. But for our Indian friends, अगर कोई साला रूरल एरिया में हाउस होल्ड एंटरप्राइज है और वहां पे अनपेड वर्क करे उसका स्पाउस, वो एक्सेप्टेबल नहीं है. Which is absolutely nuts because when you're looking at the definition, you have to look at it in totality. You can't say that it's different from for a startup in California and different in Bhagalpur. It has to be the same.
Now, one more question I had. This is the third article that came across. I came across, which was Modi's Make in India didn't make jobs. India's prime minister could win re-election without having fixed his country's unemployment crisis. This is in Foreign Policy, written by another Indian origin person, Aanchal Vora.
So here's some interesting statistics for you, and I want to have this conversation with you, not like a podcast, but like a general conversation right now. Ki
Sure.
what is happening is quite peculiar. India's youth unemployment rate kind of shoots up, and then a person reaches 30 and then it shoots down. So for people above 30, our unemployment rate is not very high, but for people in the 20s, it's quite high. Now, what possible explanation would you have as an employer for something like this, where you have young people looking for jobs but not being able to find jobs, but then once they kind of cross 30, immediately they kind of figure out what to do in life.
I don't know. I guess A, आजकल क्योंकि इंटरनेट का एक ल्योर है, तो a lot of people in the young workforce must be looking at internet related jobs, YouTube and stuff like that. That
Hmm.
could be point number one. Point number two could possibly be that a lot of mature companies are not looking to hire young kids, so job opportunities are shrunk for those people. That could be point number two for me. And point number three is, I guess, the requirement of skill sets today are more. So you end up doing a lot of vocational courses and certification courses that keeps you out of the job market for a later period. These are the three things I could think of.
So let's take on from the third point. I mean, one and two are absolutely spot on, but the third is quite a big issue, right? Earlier, people used to get an average education till say a bachelor's degree, and that's it. You didn't go beyond that. So you would finish your college by the age of 21, 22, and you'd kind of start working. Now people are finishing college at the age of 23, 24, because they're getting a kind of a master's degree has become like the standard. There's some people crazy enough like me who want to go even further. So we get kind of more and more entrenched into the system, and therefore we are unavailable to work. The point being that some of this high unemployment rate is because people were doing or pursuing other things. are naturally kind of counted as being unemployed, which again is not strictly as per the definition. So take the example of someone preparing for UPSC, and there's quite a sizable number of people who work for the UPSC.
Oh, did you
Prepare,
see that art? तूने ही भेजा था ना मेरे को, शेखर
हाँ
ने जो आर्टिकल शेयर किया था.
हाँ वो
What a
वाला.
man.
So so that person is clearly unemployed. Uh, if he says that he's looking for a job.
So he has given 73 prelims, 43 mains, 8 interviews, and he's a 47-year-old. He won't stop until he's a civil servant. भाई ये क्या है?
So this is what Sanjeev Sanyal was saying, no, that people are crazy enough to kind of ruin their lives on this simple pursuit, uh, and it's sad. But look, the point being that if you're pursuing UPSC, technically you should not be counted as being unemployed because you're not looking for jobs. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think we do a very good job of isolating this in the PLFS. So what the US does is they actually ask if you are
Hmm.
not working कि भाई job ढूंढा कितनी intensity से ढूंढा कितनी बार ढूंढा, right? Though there are those questions that give you a sense कि ये बंदा seriously job ढूंढ भी रहा है या नहीं. तो अगर वो कह रहा है कि भाई मैं अनएम्प्लॉयड हूँ और जॉब भी नहीं ढूंढ रहा, तो इसको नहीं लेना हमारे को अनएम्प्लॉयड कैटेगरी में, बिकॉज इज नॉट लुकिंग फॉर अ जॉब. एंड देन देयर इज अनदर कंपोनेंट ऑफ दिस व्हिच इज विलिंग टू वर्क एट द प्रिवेलिंग वेज रेट.
Hmm.
तो अगर मार्केट वेज आज आपको कहती है कि भाई 30,000 की नौकरी बनती है आपके स्किल सेट के लिए, और आप बोलो कि भाई मेरे को 50,000 की नौकरी ही करनी है और मैं
Hmm.
तब तक वो करूंगा जब तक मेरे को 50,000 की नहीं मिलेगी, तो टेक्निकली यू आर नॉट unemployed. You're just not getting, your aspirations are not being met, or your demand is not being met by what the market is willing to pay you. So that's the other part. Now, why is it that today you can go in Gurgaon and it's a very funny story, but chances are a full-time maid kind of has a better CTC than some engineers.
Hmm.
And the reason is again, demand and supply. We are producing too many engineers. And if I'm a company that wants to hire, I'm looking at 10,000 applicants and I don't know which among them would be good for the job, right? So I'm going to make more offers because I know that, okay, if I make 100, if I need 50 people, I'll make 100 job offers. इसमें से आधे ठीक होंगे, आधे खराब होंगे. So
Hmm.
I'll pick 100 and then I'll give them the average wage, which means I'll underpay the 50 ones that I really want. But by the time I have like spent 2-3 years working with them, I'll know कि भाई इसमें ये potential है. These are the 50 who are really productive. These are the guys who really deserve to be paid more, and their
Hmm.
increments would be much higher. And then they would kind of proceed in that fashion. Like not everyone who enters the workforce sees the same wage growth. Some people see a much faster wage growth even within the same company. You can take
Hmm.
two identical workers in TCS सेम ईयर में घुसे और रिटायरमेंट के टाइम पे दोनों का सैलरी में बहुत फर्क हो सकता है, अगर वो सेम लेवल पे भी हो, और लेवल में भी फर्क हो सकता है सीनियोरिटी का.
It also depends on their negotiation skills with the HR department, right? And their bosses.
Yeah,
How
so
well they negotiate their increments and stuff like
increments
that.
and stuff like that. Yeah, so that's another aspect to it, right? It's not just productivity, it's also your social skills, whether you're likable or not, whether you're easy to work with, and all that sort of stuff. So when we're talking about youth unemployment, these are, I would broadly summarize them as measurement challenges, except for this oversupply problem. That oversupply problem is a genuine issue that is a sorting failure. We are unable to sort workers based on their productivity, which is why everyone gets a low offer. And some of these guys choose not to work at those low offers and keep searching for jobs. So the question really is those who don't accept the prevailing market wage rate but keep searching for jobs, do you want to count them as being unemployed or not? So that's one. And the second is what can we do to create those kind of jobs for them to begin with? And is the government doing enough? Turns out that the entire kind of idea behind PLI scheme originally was that an Indian worker is 6% less productive than Chinese and Indonesian worker. So if I
Hmm.
get a company to come, and this 6% productivity is कि अगर मैं productivity adjusted wage दूंगा तो 6% महंगा पड़ता है इंडिया में माल बनाना. तो अगर मैं उस कंपनी को बोलूँ कि यार ये 6% मैं पे करता हूँ, so government will
Hmm.
cover the 6% difference. You come and set up shop here and give employment to my people.
Hmm.
So that generates, employment and creates an ecosystem. But again, that process is not a very instantaneous wala. Companies will come, they'll set up shop. Once they set up shop, they will, kind of uh, expand. The ecosystem will develop. Take Foxconn, for instance. A lot of the employment that Apple supply chain in India has is predominantly women.
Hmm.
So so there is merit to what is being done, because a lot of these jobs also have the potential to be used to upscale workers. So if you have a very vibrant electronics manufacturing ecosystem, you can have a lot of design labs which will pay engineers a lot of decent money to design and build R&D on top of those ecosystem that gets developed.
Hmm.
But you can't overdo 10 years of no work in just 10 years of a lot of work, right? Like between 2004 and 2011, without doing any reforms, we lowered our tariffs with respect to China, and that just decimated our uh, manufacturing base to a large extent. And to make matters worse, we didn't even sign free trade agreements. So in areas where we were competitive, like textiles, we lost out to Bangladesh because Bangladesh was swift enough to do all those agreements with European countries, and they were able to export and make way of those preferential kind of trade agreements that they had. And now, of course, there's a lot of push to get those agreements going, but we are still stuck in the same problem where we don't want to give concessions on agriculture. Like अभी यूके के में I read this recent story. The reason why यूके के साथ FTA stuck is because India does not want to remove protection on liquor,
Hmm.
because they feel कि इंडिया का जो liquor industry है, it will be decimated if Scotch comes from UK.
Hmm.
This at a time when Indian liquor makers are winning global awards.
Hmm.
So because you're protecting one industry, you are actually harming a lot of others in the process. And that protection itself, the industry might not need to begin with. Like the liquor industry in India can, even they will get access to the market there, right? And
Hmm.
already, I think Australia ke saath, they've already loosened up on this liquor issue, but that was presumably wine, so they were more comfortable. But here the issue is of hard spirits like whiskey and all, and therefore the government is a little less comfortable giving those concessions, probably because it's a big lobby, I guess.
Yeah, these things make no sense to me. But like the weirdest one, honestly, of the three that I read was the foreign policy bit, where, like, I mean, they जो ये ILO का डेटा एनालिसिस है उसकी भी बात करते हैं वो. दे कोट जयति घोष, देन दे कोट Tripti Rao, she's from IIM Lucknow.
Hmm.
Then they quote Raghuram Rajan. The funniest bit I want to read is, like, I think इनको बहुत चुभा होगा ये लिखने में, मगर उन्होंने लिखा है. सो लास्ट दो पैराग्राफ में पढ़ रहा हूँ. Chaudhary, he is a person they spoke to, says he is disappointed but has moved on. He's now studying for a master's in yoga science and wants to open a yoga center. As he drove back home on his scooter, he crossed a regional railway construction site. Once it is built, Chaudhary will be able to commute to Delhi every day in record time, just 50 to 55 minutes. But even when Delhi is more accessible, he faces stiff competition from millions of others for fewer job openings. Yet Chaudhary isn't upset with Modi over the glaring unemployment problem. He wants him to return to power and focus on creating the many jobs that he promised for India. I mean, this person Chaudhary, who is disappointed with the Narendra Modi government, what I find fascinating is that in the entire criticism of this very weird sort of, I'll actually share it for all of you, this foreign policy piece also, like this entire criticism in the foreign policy piece, I want everybody to go through this. It's such a fascinating mindset. I mean, my job as a content creator is to read all kinds of criticism of the government. This is the piece I'm talking about. Why
Yeah,
are you so condescending to the person who still says he'll vote for the BJP? Is like the question that Anchal Vora should have wondered about, in my opinion, is that इतना सब होने के बाद भी ये लोग वोट क्यों करते हैं मोदी को? It can't be that Modi has done some jadoo tona on them. They
right,
must have seen areas in which Narendra Modi's government has delivered. And they're like, नहीं ये यहाँ पे deliver कर चुका है और हमारे पास ये भी नहीं था, तो eventually कुछ और भी देगा ये. That just shows they trust the man more than anyone
right.
else.
So that's the point, right? That it's very difficult for reconciliation that okay, a lot of good has happened. And that's my entire grouse. I'm not saying that everything is perfect. There are
Hmm.
problems. We need to work on it. There are also sorts of problems. Every once in a while, there's a bad idea like TCS on credit cards, which makes no sense. Similarly, every once in a while, there's a bad idea like, you know, let's just restrict labor mobility or increase a minimum wage to a particular threshold. Now, problem is ki the objective that you want to do is to create jobs. How is improving a minimum wage likely to help you create more jobs to begin with?
Hmm.
And that's the question that none of these guys are focusing on. And I'll go back to what we started with the discussion before we went live, right? As an employer, you would have always found it difficult to find people to work.
नहीं यार, you go to, okay, this I say this with full responsibility. As of now, go to MIDC in the MMR area. Any MIDC. You can go to Rabale, Turbe, Dombivli, Ambernath, Mahape, any MIDC. Just go there. Paune, I've or go to Bhiwandi and go outside a factory. And you'll always see written in Marathi and English. Helper wanted or helper paije. It will always be written there. It is a constant demand, constant sadabahar demand, pan India. Helpers are not available. Helper salaries current, I'm not joking. In my own lifetime as an entrepreneur,
Hmm.
helper salaries, and I'm actually not even complaining. I was very happy when my helpers used to get paid so much. But in a matter of 10 years, we saw helper salaries increasing by at least 60 to 70% in the textile industry. In some cases 100% increase ho gayi thi.
Hmm.
100 120%. They were not being paid enough at one point of time.
Hmm.
They are being paid enough right now, is because even companies have realized that to retain workers in jobs that are more labor intensive, जिसमें मतलब basically आप थक जाते हो
Hmm.
काम करके, so you are going to be paid now. You
Right.
get paid more, क्योंकि अभी सिंपल सी बात है. In between there was a mad rush of, हर आदमी को ओला उबर ड्राइवर बनना था. A lot of people jumped into Ola Uber jobs, but now that market has saturated.
Right.
So now that market is being replaced by something like, let's say, the Zomato delivery boy or the Swiggy delivery boy. That market is pretty much saturated. In fact, I noticed that now a lot of lower income, lower middle class kids are not doing Ola Uber jobs now.
Hmm.
They have gone into other jobs because they think Ola Uber is not paying them enough. So now Ola Uber is going to people who are even lower than that. And if you look at community data and community statistics, you'll find out, like in Mumbai now, I think, and the government of India data kind of backs it up, that Muslims kind of are the poorest community in India. So you'll see the lowest of the lowest rung of jobs, now Muslims are involved in those jobs now. So
Hmm.
all these jobs, so Hindu kids are not doing those jobs. Why are the Hindu kids, if there is so much unemployment, Hindu kids should also be doing those jobs? They clearly find jobs otherwise, and they clearly find jobs elsewhere. So all these jobs are now taken over by Muslim kids. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm saying what is happening in the market. Like it's a matter of fact statement that I'm making. And yes, you are right. You will always see companies struggling to find workers. मिलते ही नहीं हैं. और अगर नहीं मिल रहे हैं तो ये दो पैरेलल रियलिटीज कैसे चल रही है, मेरे को ये समझा कर.
Because see, this is what I keep telling people that India does not have an employment problem. India has a uh, aspirational employment problem. अगर किसी को कुछ भी करना है तो सेल्फ एम्प्लॉयमेंट करके you do something and you'll make a decent living. Problem is people want good jobs, like the kind of jobs that they see on Netflix where you go in and then there's free food for everyone. There's a nice kind of cafeteria. They want to work for big tech companies and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
So the aspiration is that, and because the aspiration is that, they kind of get hell bent on that, and therefore, for a good productive part of their age, they keep chasing that aspiration. Like UPSC, 5 attempts allowed है, लोग 5 पूरे attempts देंगे, राइट? उसके बाद सोचेंगे कि क्या करना है, बट उस ड्यूरेशन में और कुछ नहीं कर रहे हैं वो, which is nuts because these are the most productive 5 years of your life. You could have done anything to build on your human capital. You could have worked at a good firm, made some money, but people still prefer to kind of chase those aspirations instead. Uh, they obviously can afford to chase those aspirations today. 20 साल 30 साल पहले they couldn't. Today the economy gives them the option of being able to do it. But the challenge really is of creating more of those aspirational jobs to begin with. And for employers, the challenge is to kind of get to a scale where they become a aspirational company to work at, right? Because a company eventually will become a global leader if it can attract the best talent. So it's that sort of situation where we are at right now. Not very unusual. Many countries have gone through the same problem. Uh, so my sense is that a lot of this will get sorted out in the next 20-30 years as more and more Indian companies scale and become larger, and more and more workers also kind of come to terms with the reality of how the kind of labor market is in India, and that you cannot really afford to be out for 5 years and then suddenly expect to come in, just come in and jump in and get a good job. ITO में छोले भटूरे वाला is making more money today than many engineers.
नहीं, and I just want to clarify that these jobs जिसके लिए helper welper का है, these are not low paying jobs anymore.
Yeah,
These are good decent paying
good paying.
jobs.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. These are not.
ये
These
ऐसा
are
नहीं है
not.
कि 5-7 हजार रुपए महीने के, नहीं नहीं, किसी को भी
हाँ,
20-20 हजार के नीचे नहीं मिलने वाला है, किसी को भी,
एक तो और
किसी
भी
को भी।
प्रॉब्लम एक तो और भी प्रॉब्लम है ना, लाइक लेट्स टेक द एग्जांपल ऑफ डिग्निटी ऑफ लेबर, राइट? वो तो कॉन्सेप्ट इज वेरी एलियन, सो ऐसे लगता है कि यार ये छोले कुलचे बेच रहा है तो एवी टाइप का होगा, या ये डिलीवरी कर रहा है तो एवी टाइप का होगा, एंड ऑल ऑफ दैट स्टफ. बट दिस यूथ माइंडसेट पर्टिकुलरली इन पंजाब इज, ये बाहर जाके सेम काम कर लेंगे बट पंजाब में नहीं करेंगे.
अरे वही तो है ना, आई मीन आई हैव सेड दिस सो मेनी टाइम्स टू मेनी पंजाबीज, आई वाज लाइक, तुम यहाँ पे बड़ी बड़ी बातें करते हो, वहां पे जाकर तुम वही तो कर रहे हो।
तो
मतलब तुम लोग एक वो क्या क्या है, वो आइल्स का एग्जाम है, पता नहीं क्या है उनका
आइल्स,
एग्जाम, वो
आइलेट्स.
आइलेट्स है, पता नहीं क्या है।
They call it IELTS. It's IELTS, but they पंजाब में they call it IELTS की ट्रेनिंग कर रहे हैं.
वो बेवकूफ जाए, मतलब क्या, मतलब छोड़ना यार, उसके बारे में
So,
बात करेंगे तो
but
कहाँ से
see,
कहाँ चल जाएंगे।
you recognize the problem, right? On one side, you're saying there's always this option of self-employment. That's always an option, right?
हम्म।
And there are people, of course, you can say that you should be able to get a job if you want and not being self-employed. But a lot of people at the age of 30, if they're unable to find a job, they kind of settle for self-employment, so to say. But Punjab is a very good state. People have money, they have land. वो 50-60 लाख खर्च करके they're willing to do these kinds of jobs in a foreign country. Whereas actually, वो सारा 50-60 लाख रुपए, if they would have just invested in Punjab, they would have been able to kind of generate a lot more employment, a lot more opportunities for themselves, presumably. But the fact that they're not doing it is also a sign of no confidence that the people of Punjab have in their own future, in the future of their own state. That they'll sell their land, go to a foreign country and do blue collar jobs rather than invest that money in the state to kind of create more growth and opportunities in the state. So
हम्म।
there's also a misallocation problem that's happening here. And I don't think we'll be able to solve this entire issue unless we kind of bring back the dignity of work. Aaj bhi, if you talk to a engineer, who is a engineer in a field where he would probably get a job at a factory, there's a lot of resistance. ये फैक्ट्री में नहीं काम करूंगा, मैं कोडिंग सीख के आई गो वर्क फॉर अ बिग टेक कंपनी, चाहे उसकी डिग्री इज इन समथिंग रिलेटेड टू मेटलर्जी और समथिंग लाइक दैट, राइट? Why is it that you're so reluctant to go and work at a factory? Because that mindset कि लेबर के साथ काम करना पड़ेगा, कौन करेगा? नहीं, हम तो वी आर एजुकेटेड, सो वी go and work in a air conditioned office in a laptop and a computer. I think there's a need to kind of revisit what qualifies as dignity of work, and I think any work that gives you an opportunity to pay for the needs, material needs of you and your family is a dignified work.
Hmm.
And that's how most of modern developed countries and developed societies function. Any work, as long as it's giving you decent pay, is dignified. There's no shame in doing it. So we need to come to that level of maturity so that this kind of misallocation problem does not happen. Abhi bhi a lot of young workers are willing to wait. Like I know so many of my friends that didn't do a job and kept waiting for 3 years because they were not willing to do a 30,000 ka starting job. It was too beneath them कि 30,000 के लिए गाड़ी का EMI नहीं जाएगा, मेरी गाड़ी का पेट्रोल और सर्विसिंग की कॉस्ट ज्यादा आती है. So but
Hmm.
why do you have to, like, if you're starting your career, why do you have to go in a car? Can you not use public transportation in Delhi?
Hmm.
So this is another issue, right? You have a generation of middle class kids who were very protected by their parents and very pampered by their parents, and
Hmm.
now when they have to start their life from scratch, they're unwilling to kind of afford the same kind of lifestyle on their salary, and therefore they're not entering the workforce because of that reason.
Yeah. So one more. This was a long in Newsline magazine. This was by Neha Mehrotra, um, who had said jobless growth fuels India's unemployment crisis with a staggering 40% of its youth out of work. The world's most populous country faces profound economic crisis. This was written last year. Now I don't want to discuss that piece because that's a little while ago, but I want to share your data now, and now I want to give you an opportunity to show your work. So you wrote, um, total employed workers in India, NSS, PLFS, Labor Bureau data by usual status age greater than or equal to 15 in 1999 was 403 million, 2004 470 million, 2011 484 million, 2014 497 million, and 2022 582 million. 27 million jobs between 2004 and 14, 85 million jobs between 2014 and 12. This is your work. For a while you've been doing this with Tirtha Tanmoy Das and Surjit Bhallaji. So now I've also put up the graph. Now explain what is this work and what is the real status of unemployment in India.
Can Before this, can I just quote one statistic, because the article you quoted said about 40% of India's youth is outside of workforce, right?
Yeah.
The US youth labor force participation rate is 60.2%, which basically means 40% of youth in the US is also outside the labor force.
वो लोग कॉलेज कैंपसेस में आजकल प्रोटेस्ट कर रहे हैं ना. वो
नहीं,
लोग बिजी हैं.
60% ही होता है जनरली. Most countries, it's very difficult to have a labor force participation rate above 60% consistently, because some people just don't want to work because of family commitments, because they're doing some other stuff. And
Hmm.
so this 40% number, I think if I look at it and it's 60%, I'm very happy that at least it's 60% workforce participation rate,
Hmm.
despite all the challenges that we face. So, coming to this total employed workers in India, basically using the usual status, you can go use the NSS survey and get an estimate of how many people say that they were employed in a given year of the survey. Now, the people who are employed, basically it means that they have some kind of job, right? So, that becomes total employment ka series. The US does it much better because they do it from a firm size. So what the US does is they go and ask a firm, how many employed workers do you have? And that's how they construct a comparable non-farm payroll data for the US. In India, we don't have that. So what we have is the NSS survey. And in the NSS survey, you go and ask people whether they were working or not. You take the number of people who say that they were working, and then you kind of report the numbers for different years. And that's what we do. So we begin with 1999 and go till the last year of the annual survey that we have, and we just compare the total employed workers in India depending upon which uh, year we are looking at. So 99 and 2004 and 2011 is the employment unemployment survey, which was usually done pehle. 2014 is the labor bureau survey, and then uske baad we have the PLFS survey. And what basically comes across is that the period between 2004 and 2011 actually had very small employment growth. So, if we just refresh our memory, the term jobless growth was coined sometime in 2009-10 to give a sense of urgency to the problem that you're growing very fast, but you're not creating enough jobs. And the benchmark was the period between 99 and 2000 where more jobs was created. So relative to that period, a lot less jobs were added during these 10 years period. Uh, in fact, in 8 years, about 8 crore jobs, 8 crore odd jobs were created between 2004 and 22. And that kind of gives you a sense of roughly a crore jobs each year being added into the economy, which is much larger than the 30 lakh jobs that were created in the 10-year period between 2004-5 and 2014.
Hmm. So, what are the possible reasons, in your opinion, for that?
Uh, well, I think there is a lot of the growth that happened during 2004 and 14, a lot of people have forgotten. But the happy years were between 2005 and 2008, before 2008. So those were the three high growth years. And then, of course, after that, if you remember 2009, again, you get a nice recovery from the global financial crisis. But 2010 onwards, it was a downward spiral. The global economy was not doing well. India was doing much worse. High inflation, rupee was very volatile. Investment hua nahi tha, and there was policy paralysis. So a lot of new projects got stuck. And when a lot of new projects got stuck, basically investment stopped, and as a consequence, employment generation kind of slowed or halted. To make matters worse, even infrastructure was not being developed at a very fast pace back then. So even construction jobs were being lost. So, so a lot of those factors kind of culminated in a muted employment growth number for that 10-year period. A lot of growth that we see in employment now is coming in construction and self-employment. Some of it is in new areas such as startups. A lot of startups have added to a lot of jobs over recent years, mostly clustered in and around Bangalore and Hyderabad. So I think because there is a clear policy kind of clarity now, which is why you see a lot of these global capability centers also move to India. So JP Morgan now runs a very big GCC in India. A lot of other big banks are also kind of running their core operations now from India and its skilled workforce, because the talent pool is large and very diverse, and a lot of that has started happening in recent years. So that pivot away from China in manufacturing, Apple coming in, GCCs coming in, and the service sector doing well. All of that has created this kind of robust employment growth, which is aided and abated by the construction job growth that has happened largely because of highways and so on and so forth. So on one side, you're generating a very high skilled employment, in niche areas. And on the other side, you're also taking care of the very low skilled, low productive workers by giving them construction jobs and moving them out of agriculture. So both those things are kind of contributing in a positive way to what we see now, on the employment front. This is still not ideal. I mean, there's a lot more that needs to be done. Particularly, a lot of the excess employment in tech sector is being readjusted now. So as more and more people get pushed out of the workforce, you will have a lot of conversation about restricting employers' ability to fire mass people at will. but the fact remains that there has been over hiring, and even if you control for that over hiring, largely growth numbers in employment look quite robust.
Hmm.
Uh, but I'll say this though, it's very puzzling when I look at the PLFS data. In a way, so wage का डेटा मिल जाता है हमें यहाँ से, तो majority workforce के लिए wage ही उनकी income है. There are very few people who have capital income. Most people with particularly salaried workers, salary is the big component of it. Salaried workers के हिसाब से there's a very small, like it's in thousands of people in India who are in the income tax bracket. So there's
Hmm.
something very puzzling with the PLFS data as well. That why does it say that there are only a few thousand, 10,000, 20,000 workers who are in the income tax ka bracket, whereas the actual numbers is in crores.
और क्या है यार, तेरे को भी मालूम है, मेरे को भी मालूम है क्या हो रहा है.
So
कैश में लेते हैं पगारें और क्या करते हैं
नहीं, बट ये तो
सब.
सर्वे है ना, ये तो सर्वे है, इतना अंडर रिपोर्टिंग.
अरे यार, लोग झूठ बोलते हैं यार. सबको अपना रोकड़े का इनकम कोई नहीं बताएगा यार. तू कितना भी होगा सगे वाला, वो नहीं बताएगा.
बट but ये जो अंडर रिपोर्टिंग है, दिस इज क्रिएटिंग अ बिग इशू, राइट? बिकॉज a lot of people want to use this survey now to infer about poverty and inequality.
करो करो.
So, so
बेस्ट
like
ऑफ लक.
so look at we were talking about how do you know which data to use, right? This data tells you that there are about 23-24,000 tax people in India who have tax paying income.
अरे क्या बोले. But I think the biggest problem India faces, and I hope the Modi government in its third term, if they come, tackle this, is the quality of workforce in India,
Yeah.
which our, I don't know how to say, substandard education system produces. We have a very substandard education system. We are not doing much to change it. We refuse to instill any kind of critical thinking in our young kids. We are stuck in absurdities. We just don't value critical thinking. It's going to create a lot of problems for us in the future. uh, the government can do what it's doing. I think in many ways, I'm not blaming the government, but right now the government is being able to manage the storm is because basically before this government came, there was no infrastructure in India. That's just a fact of life. So a lot of, your job requirement was just taken care of. Ki bridges banao, highways banao. Listen, in the next 10 to 15 years, all of this is going to be built. You're not going to have a big boom in that sector coming maximum after 2 decades. You care for India, start investing in high quality education system. That is my one criticism of the Modi government. We are not improving our education standards at the rate at which it should be. The graduates, yes, the Flynn effect is real. Yes, kids are getting smarter than what at least our generation was when I passed out
I
10th
don't
standard.
know. I don't think so. My experience is the opposite. Like try working with a young kid.
तो हर जनरेशन में ऐसे ही होते हैं रे. बच्चे ऐसे ही होते हैं. मतलब तू और मैं भी ऐसे ही थे जब हम लोग 20s में थे. हम भी ऐसे ही थे. वो नहीं होता है, मगर डेफिनेटली दे आर स्मार्टर नाउ. बट स्टिल, it's a genuine concern I have. I look at the curriculum, the teaching set, and a lot of things in India is not good. And
I'll give
people
you an
would,
example. Na? अभी तो we used to live in a limited information world कि newspapers से information आएगा and then you would interpret, and so that's how we have always functioned. Now
hmm,
we bombard people with information, and
yeah, yeah,
that is supposed to make people smarter,
yeah.
right? It's not. People don't know what to believe. So
Critical thinking. Uh,
exactly.
for example, for today's podcast itself, I made sure that I sent you the articles also, right? मैंने तुझे भी भेजे, तूने मुझे भेजे. It needs a lot of hard work. I mean, 2-3 दिन पहले ही मैंने ये ट्वीट किया था. Basically, even as far as Indian content creation is concerned, it's extremely low IQ. Indian content creation, whether it's YouTube, whether it's any other platform, is extremely low IQ. मैं तेरे को ऑफलाइन अभी कहानियां बताऊंगा एक बहुत बड़े पॉडकास्टर की अपने पॉडकास्ट के बाद, और तू खून के आंसू रोएगा उसके बाद. लिटरली ये मैं जो तेरे को बोल रहा हूँ ना, वो मेरे को मतलब मैंने आंखों से देखा, वो
हाँ.
आंखों से. तो इतना खून के आंसू रोएगा ना कि अगर ये हाल है तो मतलब यार बहुत 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 समय है कि बस ये ऐसे नहीं हो सकता. जो हम लोग का क्या हो गया ना, हम लोगों ने एक बहुत अच्छी टेक्नोलॉजी स्टोनेज लोगों को दे दी है, और स्टोरेज लोगों ने उगा बुगा कर रहे हैं और घपाघप. मगर तुम्हें मार्क माय वर्ड्स, 10 साल में इंडियन कंटेंट लैंडस्केप चेंज हो जाएगा. जब सोसाइटी ज्यादा इंटेलिजेंट हो जाएगी ना, तो ये जो आज की डेट में ये एक जो जॉनरास चल रहे हैं, असल में एक बंदा है, मैं नाम नहीं लूंगा उसका, मुझे उसके साथ पॉडकास्ट करने का मैसेज आया. ये बंदा मतलब अगर पॉडकास्ट पे आ जाए ना करण, तो तेरे मिलियन हिट्स गारंटीड है.
हम्म.
ये बंदा पॉडकास्ट पे जाने के पैसे लेता है
अच्छा.
लोगों की. मैं मजाक नहीं कर रहा हूँ. मैंने इसको ना बोल दिया क्योंकि मैंने बोला ये इतनी वाहियात सूडो साइंस पेडल करता है, इतनी वाहियात सूडो साइंस पेडल करता है कि मैं मर जाऊं, मैं इससे बात नहीं करूंगा. मुझे नहीं
हाँ.
मिलियन क्लिक्स चाहिए, क्योंकि मतलब मेरा तो पूरा ब्रांड ही सली हो जाएगा कि मैंने ऐसे आदमी से बात कर ली. मतलब इतनी वाहियात हालत है. मैं तेरे को दिखाता हूँ बाद में वो चैट. मगर ये ये एक सीरियस कंसर्न मेरा ये है. और ये मैं मान ही नहीं सकता हूँ कि अगर मेरे जैसे लोग, तुम हो, हर्ष है, हम लोग बहुत लोग हैं, हम लोग भी उसी सिस्टम से आए हुए हैं. इट्स अ मैटर ऑफ एप्लीकेशन एंड इंटेंट.
I'll tell
मैंने
you
कौन सा
one.
मेरे को स्कूल में अच्छा सिखाया था.
But I'll tell you one problem which has crept in, and I don't know if it's necessarily good. And it's a criticism of many of us, including me as well, and presumably many of our friends. एक jingoism आ गया है बहुत ज़्यादा, right? कि and yes, we get a lot of unfair criticism all the time. By we, I mean India gets a lot of unfair criticism all the time, but there are problems, right? Like it's not कि suddenly everything is great. Yeah, everything outside India is pathetic and bad. So वो जो एक nuance and measured view होता था, that's lost because you're either extremely bullish or you're extremely bearish. There's no middle ground anymore. And sadly, that is the reason why I'm worried that a lot of what needs to be done on the policy front to develop as a modern society, uh, that discussion and that conversation is not happening. Like अभी क्या डिस्कस हो रहा है कि अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट बढ़ा है या नहीं, या एम्प्लॉयमेंट जनरेशन है या नहीं. This is not the conversation that economists in India should be having. The conversation should be that look, we need to create a labor market which is dynamic, where people can find good productive jobs, and that wages are so negotiable that economic activity में labor का share capital के share से धीरे धीरे बढ़े, so that inequality also comes down. So what can be the policy framework, what can be some interventions that the government can do at different levels to create that kind of a labor market. वही जैसे पीडीएस में मैंने वी डिस्कस्ड इन द प्रीवियस पॉडकास्ट, राइट? द क्वेश्चन शुड नॉट बी कि क्या हुआ, बट रादर व्हाट नीड्स टू बी डन टू इम्प्रूव ऑन दिस. But the discourse has kind of spiraled down and unraveled to a point where कि unemployment बढ़ी है या कम हुई है उसी पे डिबेट चल रहा है, rather than actually accepting what has happened as a matter of fact and thinking of how can we do better.
या क्या बोले, अभी कुछ बोल तो सकते नहीं है. क्या बोलने लायक नहीं रहे. बट चलो अभी क्वेश्चंस ले लेते हैं, देन वील रैप इट अप. सो पहला था, अकॉर्डिंग टू इकोनॉमिक टाइम्स 514 million jobs were created since 2014. How accurate is this? Does this count a migrant worker going back to his village to farm as 2 jobs, and when he comes back, is it a third job? That's a good question.
Yeah, it's just one job because the way we calculate jobs in India, एक तो 514 million seems not correct, because बेसिकली इट मीन्स कि 51 करोड़ जॉब्स 2014 के बाद आई हैं. 51 करोड़ जॉब्स इज अ लॉट, राइट, लाइक 10 साल में. बट बेसिकली it counts as a single job because the person, you count the number of employed workers. Now whether he's doing 2 or 3 jobs, that does not matter. As long as he's employed, he's counted as a single worker.
Hmm. So next question है. So if everyone is preparing for exams, UPSC, SCSC, CDS, seeking a job is employed, बस उन्हें नहीं पता. Are private jobs in surplus for people seeking them alone? मुझे ये क्वेश्चन ही नहीं समझ में आ रहा. तुझे अगर समझ में आ रहा है आइंस्टाइन के जैसा एक क्वेश्चन, मुझे नहीं समझ में आया.
No, so they're not employed because they're preparing for UPSC, but they're not a part of the workforce because they're not actively searching for a job. And because they're not actively searching for a job, then therefore you should not count them as being unemployed because unemployment requires you to not be working and keep searching for a job. These people would probably be not included in the
So
workforce.
to simplify it, homeless people are not part of the unemployment data.
Yeah, homeless people, if they're not looking for a job, they would not be considered as
Hmm.
अनएम्प्लॉयड. अभी तो काफी होमलेस लोग इसलिए भी है ना, रेंट बहुत महंगा हो गया है कुछ सिटीज में. तो टेंट वेंट लगा के वो एम्प्लॉयड भी हैं, कुछ अनएम्प्लॉयड भी हैं. इफ यू नो व्हाट आई एम.
As per any recent data, what is the percentage of direct taxpayers and what is the overall increase?
Well, the India's, so this question keeps come quite often, keeps coming up that kitna percent of direct taxpayers hai. And people kind of look at that number by saying that okay, it's like about what, like 2-3%, and therefore it's very low. But the fact remains कि आपका आधा workforce is exempt from income taxes to begin with because agricultural income is not taxed. And then जो बचता है उसमें से जो वर्किंग एज पॉपुलेशन में है उसमें there's a very small proportion that comes under the tax net. Uh, Unpopular opinion, I think India under taxes income at the bottom and over taxes income at the top. So if you want to increase direct taxpayers, you have to have an honest conversation about taxing agricultural income at some point and at what
Hmm.
level you want to start taxing them. And
Hmm.
at the same time, some conversation about how to reduce taxes at the slight peak end because 42% tax in India, people will, one very nice Babu said कि फॉरेन कंट्रीज में भी 42% होता है तो इंडिया में भी हो सकता है, कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. बट a lot of these other countries that charge 42%, some part of it goes for your social security.
Hmm.
So if you do the comparison based on social security contributions, which of course India's direct tax does not include,
Hmm.
then India has one of the highest personal income tax rates at the top.
हम लोग बहुत अमीर हैं. टैक्स
Uh,
कर करके मार डालेंगे लोगों को. अच्छा, आस्क करण, आस्क कुशल, आर यू गाइस सीइंग एनी ग्राउंड सेंटिमेंट अगेंस्ट मोदी बीजेपी इन द ऑनगोइंग लोकसभा इलेक्शन ऑन अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट? यार ये आदमी है ना, ये मेरा फेवरेट क्वेश्चन पूछने वाला है. ये हमेशा क्या करता है में एकदम जैसे पैरानॉइड डूम्सडे सिनेरियो होएगा ना, वो वाला क्वेश्चन पूछता है. इसका एक तो नाम इतना लंबा है, उस्ताद पिटुद्दीन खान छाछड़. मतलब ऐसा एक तो वाहियात नाम, ऊपर से ऐसे ऐसे डेंजरस क्वेश्चंस पूछता है ये आदमी. मैं अभी इसको और डरा देता हूँ. मैं बोलता हूँ बर्बाद हो गए हैं भाई. हर आदमी बोल रहा है अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट फैली हुई है. वो लोगों का बस चले तो मोदी जी को कच्चा खा जाएंगे भाई. ये है मेरा आंसर. मेरे को तुमको डराना है अभी. तू तू तेरा आंसर दे. बर्बाद हो गया, मोदी हार रहा है.
मेरे को आइडिया नहीं सर बिकॉज ग्राउंड सेंटिमेंट तो आई हैव एक्चुअली नो आइडिया.
मैं तो लिटरली कल आया इंडिया से, तो मैं इसको और डरा देता हूँ. बोलता बहुत खराब है ग्राउंड सेंटिमेंट भाई. बीजेपी को एक सीट मिलने वाली है, सिर्फ एक. बहुत खराब है. मजा आएगा. अभी कम
अच्छा.
से कम इसकी 4 रातें खराब होंगी.
अच्छा, एक क्वेश्चन मेरे को ये भी है. लॉट ऑफ द डिस्कशन ऑन अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट इन इंडिया, they never report state-wide unemployment numbers. Have you ever wondered why?
पागल है क्या? ऐसे सब आउट ऑफ सिलेबस क्वेश्चन. इतना काम इतना कम, वो सारे स्टेट के इकोनॉमिस्ट अपने ऑलरेडी एक सेंटर में सब झोल चालू है, अभी तू स्टेट में भी झोल की बात कर रहा है। इतने झोल नहीं होते भाई, इतने झोल नहीं हैंडल होते लोगों के। ना ना ना
So
ना।
the reason I'm asking is because Gujarat consistently has like 2% के आसपास.
भाई वो गुजरात है,
तो
उनको वैसे ही काम करना अच्छा लगता है गुजरातियों को।
तो बट वहां भी तो माइग्रेंट लेबर काफी ज्यादा है ना.
डेफिनेटली।
So the question really is, which again, broader point, right? Why are some states so successful in creating employment and not others?
Clearly, it's also culture. In the
Uh,
interest of maintaining our TFR, should Government of India discourage FLFP as working empowered women means lower TFR and hence long-term population? Oh bhai, oh bhai.
no,
oh,
it's a very important.
oh
Uh,
यार, ओ यार औरतों को अपने डिसीजन लेने दो यार। अरे यार क्यों, मगर मतलब you can have children and still do a job, man. Women can leave for a bit and come back and do a
Actually,
job.
South Korea, mein, it's not happening anymore. Basically, women are not having kids at all because they want. So what happens is when women leave, they pay what is known as the childbearing penalty. So because they leave during the most productive years of their life, their wage gets kind of penalized for it. So a lot of Korean women now don't want to have kids in general.
Yeah,
Uh,
but they don't see my question. Look, I'm not anti-family. In fact, I always believe ठीक है, family होनी चाहिए, सब ठीक है. But yeah, the world is.
the question is, I'll sound like a kind of center left. I think I am center left to a large extent. I would not say that I'm center right. Uh, uh, is that is the current kind of setup of the labor market conducive enough to encourage women who want to make the conscious choice of having kids, being able to make that choice and still have a fruitful career?
Bliss.
And or alternately, does the state need to compensate those women who kind of make the choice of having kids at the expense of their career progression? And that's a valid question that many countries are facing because women just don't want to have as many kids as they probably were in the last cohort. Like take a good example of Japan, right? Like what will be left of Japan if the fertility rate remains as what it is, and then eventually they'll run out of people. So it's a tricky question, man. And again, that's as I
कुछ नहीं
said.
होगा, डरो मत। इवेंचुअली 25-30 साल में सब मशीन तुम्हारे जॉब्स करेंगी, तुम खाली बैठे रहना।
नहीं, बट खाली बैठने के
बच्चे
लिए
ही बच्चे पते करो।
I don't. I mean, I'm not cynical that depopulation would become a real threat, but like in some countries, it has become a
my,
issue.
my,
So
my point is that it's immaterial in the larger scheme of things, that whether x area of planet earth gets populated or not, eventually things get flatlined and they get
right,
adjusted. Don't look at homo sapiens in the last 14,000 years, look at homo sapiens in its current form
entirely.
for at least 500,000 years, and then you'll understand that all these fears are a little overblown. It's
Overblown, yeah.
your baseline matters. Like, where do you take the baseline from?
Right.
That's the key.
So,
Okay, is it possible to have tax brackets 0 to 10 lakh 0%? Like, I support this man wholeheartedly.
no, but this is a key problem. I would say 25% at the top, I'm fine with, but 0 to 10, 0% is a big problem because then what it means is that you're taxing at a very high percentile level to begin with. So I'll send you that distribution that I did. India already under taxes at the bottom. इसको 10
Hmm.
तक ले जाएंगे तो हम और under tax करेंगे. And what will happen in the process is that the dependence on indirect taxes will go up.
Hmm.
तो स- घूम फिर के ये समझ लो तरुण जी, पैसा आपकी जेब से ही निकलेगा। और
हाँ
अगर
वो
आपकी
तो
जेब से नहीं निकल रहा तो गवर्नमेंट बोरो करके आपकी सेविंग से निकाल रही है और
Th-
इन्फ्लेशन इंड्यूस कर रही
yes, there is no free meal, as they
है।
say. Everything comes out of our own pocket. There is no free.
राइट।
This is a good question. Do employment surveys consider what sectors are generating employment and by how much? How much do they pay? How do these how do study these survey methodologies? Good question.
I actually have been saying this for a while. India needs a establishment survey for employment. We don't have one. Just may we kind of go and ask different sectors, ki, what is the pay, what is the total employed in your work, in your establishment, and do it over a period of time, because then we can get the sectoral kind of classification. Currently जो ये labor force survey है, periodic labor force survey, this gives us some idea, but this is coming from the household side. So if we're really interested in knowing which sector is driving the kind of job growth and stuff like that, I think it would be a better idea to also do it from the establishment side, the firm side, survey of firms and hiring managers, rather than kind of sticking to just households. Uh, so that is the more standard way in many countries that they
Hmm.
practice.
Yeah, I agree. So, Karan, before we wrap up, is there anything else you wanted to cover, or do you think we've missed out on something?
I think we have covered broadly everything except
Yeah.
the manufacturing versus services, but I think a lot has been written on that anyways.
Yeah, yeah. I think the wo theek hai, and we can always cover it later on,
Yeah.
one of these days. Maybe that could be another topic for next time. But once again, before we go, I wanna tell people what all I had covered today. So today, PIB had released the PLFS quarterly bulletin for Jan to March 2024 for urban employment. We covered that. Then in articles, we covered a Wire article by Santosh Mehrotra, which was written on 8th May 2024.
Can we
A for
show his profile again?
नहीं आगे बढ़ से then we covered a foreign policy article by Anchal Vora, which was there. I don't know the date. Huh, it was April 19, 2024. Then there was a scroll article that we covered by Abhik Deb, which was March 21, 2024. We obviously covered Karan's Substack. If you guys want, you can go and check out Karan's Substack also. This was called Data Delayed is Data Denied for Policymaking, February 13, 2023. Obviously, you can follow Karan on social media and his tweets at Karan Bhasin 95. He writes regularly over there. We another article from June 7, 2023 was by Neha Mehrotra. It was on jobless growth and India's unemployment crisis. Uh, you can look at all these articles, you can make up your mind, and you can decide for yourself. The reason I wanted to do this discussion, I repeat again, in an election season, actually, these are the discussions that should happen. But other than that, everything else happens. Whether Modi is retiring after 75, whether Kejriwal, who's fighting at 22 seats, I mean, all kind of absurdities get discussed in Indian elections. But I've tried my best to keep things sane through this podcast. And Karan, as always, a pleasure talking to you, and thanks for coming.
Anytime, sir. Nice speaking with you after so long.
Chalo, take care, Abhi. Hopefully, you'll meet in a month or so in person.
Right.
But guys, before we wrap up, once again, my book is out. So if you have not bought it, the book is now available at least in 4 countries. It's available in India. It's available in Australia, New Zealand. मैं उनको एक ही country मानता हूँ, अलग नहीं मानता हूँ, हाँ, एक ही है वो. It's available in Canada. It's available in America. Wherever you want to buy it, on Amazon.com or Amazon.ca or Amazon.com.au or Amazon.in. Just go and buy the book. It's called Nastic, Why I Am Not an Atheist. If you don't buy this book, God will punish you. याद रखना, भगवान तुम्हें पाप देगा, लगेगा तुमको, तो जाके मेरी बुक खरीदो. If you want to support this podcast and this venture where we do these kinds of discussions and don't chase the clicks, then you have to support the membership program of this podcast. The membership program of this podcast is accessible through Patreon, YouTube, and Fanmo, all 3 platforms. You can also send your donations to kushalmehra at ICICI on UPI. You can also buy the Cārvāka podcast merchandise on kadakmerch.com or on kushalmehra.com. If you can't do any of this and you just want to enjoy the content for free, like this video, subscribe to the Cārvāka podcast YouTube channel, leave a comment in the comment section. If you're an audio listener, then just leave a rating on your preferred audio platform wherever you listen to this podcast. I'll see you guys next time. And also go follow Karan. Karan ke sare details are there in the description of the podcast, whether on the audio or the video platform, wherever you're accessing this. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, namaste. Take care. Bye bye.